Are you a little unsure of how to get started into property investing? Maybe you've heard lots of different strategies that are floating around, but you're not really sure of the pros and cons of every single one and really which is the best strategy for you. In this video, we're going to explore the top 5 property investing strategies in the UK and understand the pros and cons of every single one. Stick around for the 5th one because I think that's an absolute gem, and I'll go into that in more detail at the end of the video. We'll also look into the key mistakes that people make when they're first getting started in property investing. If you're new here, my name is Matt. I work for a bank by day, I invest in property on the side, and I simplify insights on property, productivity and tech to help people lead a more financially savvy life. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel for loads of great content, and don't forget to hit the like button for 7 years good luck. So, when looking to choose the right property investing strategy for you, it's all about understanding what your plans and goals are long term. Quite simply, there are 2 ways to invest in a property. The first is buy a property and then hold it with the idea of renting it out to a tenant. The second is buying a property and flipping it or refurbing it with the idea of selling it. Now that sounds easy, but there are 5 main strategies that you can consider today that balance time, money and experience. The main thing here is considering whether your strategy or your plan is all about cash flow or whether it's about capital appreciation and growth of your initial seed money that you have. So let's explore buy-to-lets, HMOs, serviced accommodation, flipping properties, and a 5th mystery strategy that I'll reveal later in the video. So the first main strategy is simple vanilla buy-to-let property. Most beginner property investors do start with this particular strategy. It's very easy, it's lower risk, it requires less capital upfront to purchase a house, and it's a very easy method. All you need to do is have enough money for a deposit and all the costs that come with that, and then purchase a property and then rent it out or do a small refurbishment and then sell it on for a little bit of profit. The great thing about buy-to-let as well is that if you have no prior landlord experience or within property investing, you'll have, out of all the different specialist types of mortgages available, buy-to-let is going to be the one where you have the most availability for you with good interest rates. Make sure you know how to evaluate a property deal, and if you get your numbers right, then you can make a really decent £300–500 a month profit after all of the costs if you choose the right house and the right area. I have another video on how to work out return on investment and yield if you click the link just here in the corner. So here are some of the pros and cons of buy-to-let property. It's great for beginners. There are often loads of different mortgage products available on the market, so therefore they are competitive. Tenants who stay in the properties are likely to stay for a long time because they could be a family who are not wanting to move every 6 months, for example. There's little effort once the tenant has moved in, especially if you're using a managing agent. It's very easy to calculate your sums to work out profit, return on investment and yield. And lastly, because house prices further up north in the UK are typically cheaper, it means that you need a low deposit to get started. And some of the cons of buy-to-let, after all of your costs and everything you've considered when purchasing the property and renting it out, it doesn't make as much cash flow or money at the end of the month compared to other cash flow heavy strategies. Secondly, there's legislation. Now this exists for any property strategy and buy-to-let is probably the easier one, but you need to make sure that you are clued up and understand all the different documentation and certificates that you're required to present and show to your tenant upon them moving into your property. And another con is that if you are far away from your investment property, then typically you'll have to pay a managing agent anywhere between 10 to 15%. The second major strategy you should be thinking about are houses of multiple occupancy, otherwise known as an HMO property. Now, do you remember when you was a student and if you had a house share with lots of different people and you all had your own different contract, then this is the exact same type of housing. It works really well for students, but also works really well for young working professionals as well, who might just need to be in a city for 12 to 18 months, for example. And the whole idea of an HMO property is, rather than renting out the entire house for a fixed fee, you instead rent out each individual room. And often what can happen if you have a house with more than 3 to 4 bedrooms, often this can generate more than what a buy-to-let would on the same property. For example, a buy-to-let might generate you £300–500 profit every single month, whereas if you was renting out 4 or 5 bedrooms, that could be just over £1,000 profit after all of your costs. So there's a big difference there. There's a lot of legislation and a lot of rules in terms of HMOs. The best thing that I would recommend is Googling the name of your local council and then the word HMO, and that's where you'll find local council HMO specifications to understand the size of the rooms, the size of the kitchen, how many hobs and cookers you need per X amount of people, whether there's certain fire safety precautions that you need to be thinking of as well. So all of that will be with your local council. Just go and check it out. The good thing about HMO is that you don't need to buy a huge 5-bedroom house. You could be looking at 2 or 3 bedroom terraced houses houses, and all you need to do is convert the lounge into a bedroom, and if there's an attic room, you can get an extra bedroom there as well. And that's how you turn a 2 or 3 bed into a 5 or 6 bed. And the last thing you should consider with an HMO property is there are lots of popular areas growing where HMOs exist, and because there are so many HMOs on streets now, councils are introducing something called Article 4. Now, Article 4 isn't something new, but it has been around a while, and what it means is that the council can lay a blanket direction over a particular area, and at the moment that's typically popular towns and cities, and that means that you need to get planning permission to convert a family home into a HMO. And that means that in those Article 4 areas, if there's too much saturation, then the council are going to decline that planning application to do that. So you need to be wary of Article 4 areas. So some of the pros of HMO properties, firstly, is that HMO properties can typically generate more cash flow compared to a vanilla buy-to-let. Secondly, if you have one tenant who leaves one room, that whole property is still generating some form of income from all the other rooms that have been let. And lastly, it's great for experienced landlords, because if you have some vanilla buy-to-let properties and a family moves out, then if you want to consider moving it to a HMO property, you can really squeeze and stretch the potential that that property offers for you. Some of the cons of a HMO property, obviously it requires a lot of knowledge on HMO legislation. They're typically a little bit more expensive to get up and started and running, especially if you decorate the place really, really well. Good mortgage rates are quite difficult to come across if you don't have prior buy-to-let experience. And typically tenants tend to stay for between 12 and 18 months in terms of their tenancies, meaning your turnover is going to be typically a lot higher compared to a normal family staying in a buy-to-let property. Thirdly, we're going to explore serviced accommodation. Have you ever stayed in a city in the UK, for example, in Manchester, and paid £150 for an apartment? That usually is a serviced apartment or serviced accommodation, and especially if it's through Airbnb. Maybe you've been to Cornwall and stayed in a cottage and paid £1,000 for the week through Airbnb. Again, that's serviced accommodation. With the growth of Airbnb over the past few years, there has been an explosion of serviced accommodation properties. And at the moment, because this is quite new and the government are quite slow to keep up with different trends, there's not a huge amount of legislation around this. However, it is increasing. A decent flat in a city centre that has all the right permissions to be serviced accommodation can generate a good few £1,000s a month if the occupancy rate is high enough. But one thing to bear in mind is seasonal impacts. If you have a holiday cottage in Cornwall, then one thing to remember is that you'll have a higher cash flow in the summer months, but as you get towards winter and things slow down, you're going to have more void periods, therefore your occupancy rate is going to go down, and the property won't earn as much as what it potentially could do. Don't be fooled by the cash flow pro of this though, because serviced accommodation is very, very hard work. You need full automated systems in place to manage cleaners, the laundry and the bedding needs changing, to make sure the place is clean every single time. And because there are all these different parts and systems to serviced accommodation, it means that there is more opportunity for things to go wrong. And if you're 5 hours away from that particular property, then that could be a huge headache for you, so bear that in mind. Despite all of the challenges and the hard work with serviced accommodation, if you had a flat in Manchester city centre and it rented out for £150 a night, and you managed to let that property out for 25 days in a month, then that would generate you £3,750 gross rental income in just 1 month. So it's definitely something to consider for that reason. The fourth strategy is flipping houses. Now, this is really popular in the UK, and we have tons of programs on TV. One of them is Homes Under the Hammer, where you typically see people go to an auction, buy a property for a really cheap price, they spend £10,000 or £20,000 on a refurb, and then they make tons and tons and tons of profit. It's probably not like that every single time in reality, but if you run the right numbers and you understand the figures and you understand the cost of a refurb on the property that you're buying, then it can be very lucrative and you can make a good lump sum of 10, 20 or maybe £30,000 depending on the price of the property that you're buying and how much money you're putting into the refurb. The big risk with flipping a property is that if you do get your numbers wrong or you don't truly understand the house prices in a particular area, then you could tie a lot of your money up just in one deal, or even buy a property and realise that the refurb costs more than what you have. Therefore, you have a project that you can't complete and don't have enough money to finish it. Therefore, you can't sell it and realise a profit. And ultimately, off the back of that, you're going to make a loss. The best way to make profit when flipping a property is to buy that particular property below market value for comparables in that area. Now, you can't just go to a nice family home and ask for a 20% discount. They're just not going to sell it like that, nor is an estate agent going to entertain that kind of offer. But if you find a property that's unloved or has a particular problem with it, for example, Japanese knotweed or a structural issue, or maybe if it's leasehold, the lease is running out, if there's a problem that you can fix, then that's a great way to negotiate down the price on the purchase of the property and then increase the value by fixing the problem. One key here is to understand the difference between asking price and market value. So you might see a property on Rightmove or Zoopla that is selling for £120,000. Now, you might see that comparables of the exact same size of house and bedrooms in the area are only selling for £100,000. This doesn't mean that the property you're looking at is worth 120, it means that's their asking price, but the true market value might only be £100,000. So if you offer £100,000, you're not getting it below market value, you're getting it at market value, and that's something to consider, and some new property investors do trip up on that. Property flipping is something that I want to get into to start with. Ultimately, I'd love to work on development, but in terms of a mortgage and lending perspective, you need to show lenders that you have experience of managing a build team and managing a refurbished project until you can truly unlock things like development finance. And the great thing is that if you buy a property, you could make 30, 40,000 profit on a really, really good deal, which is more than the average salary in the UK. Lastly, but not least, we explore the world of commercial property. Now, I think this is an absolute gem that hasn't truly been explored yet by a lot of property investors. It is nowhere near as popular in the commercial market as what it is in the residential market. We've seen this year that house prices are skyrocketing really, really high because of the stamp duty tax break, and we had the pent-up demand after the lockdown. But the great thing with commercial property is that because there is less competition, it means that there are more opportunities available. This could be as simple as buying a shop local to you that has a flat upstairs and a shop on the ground floor, and this means that you can split the property, so you can have a small cafe or shop on the ground floor and then have tenants living above within the flat itself paying rent. So there's two different streams of income there. The great thing is that if you have a family in the flat above there, then they are likely to stay for a long amount of time. But also with commercial leases, they typically last anywhere from 5 to 10 up to 25 years. So commercial tenants are real long-term tenants. And one key thing in the commercial world is the type of lease that you'll have. If you have a buy-to-let property and something breaks within it, it's your responsibility as the landlord to fix it. But within the commercial world, they have what are called FRI leases, which is a fully repairing and insuring lease. Therefore, the tenant who moves in has to insure it, they make any repairs and any damages they look after. Therefore, you as the landlord are very, very hands-off. One of the cons of commercial property is really you're at the mercy of the economy. If you have a high street unit, for example, then just look at this year. The high street has completely died in some way, shape or form. There's a big shift online, and I'm sure it'll rebound to some degree in the future, but the high street is continually changing, so you need to ensure that you have different exit strategies and a backup plan. For example, if shops become less and less popular, what can you use that space for on the high street in the future? To summarise all of this, every investor is completely different. We all have completely different risk appetites. My advice to you is do your homework on every single strategy. Think about whether you want cash flow in the future or whether you want to build up your capital first. Maybe you want to think about how much time you have available and what your current expertise is today. Every strategy has different pros and cons, and it really is just weighing up the difference between all of them and what you feel resonates best with you to help you achieve those goals in the future. Overall, there's no right or wrong answer. My recommendation is speak to a qualified professional, whether that's your accountant, a solicitor or a broker, and really understand what is best for your own individual situation, because they are the only people who can give you accredited advice. I hope you found this video useful. Please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you'd love to see loads more content on property and productivity. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.